If you're over 60, there's one simple habit that seems innocent, even relaxing, but could be putting your brain at serious risk while you sleep. No pain, no warning, no obvious sign. You go to bed feeling fine. The next morning, your words are slurred. Your arm won't lift. The room feels unfamiliar. As a neurologist, I've seen this story unfold too many times. Seniors who are otherwise careful with their health, watching their diet, staying active, managing their medications, suddenly blindsided by a stroke. And in many of these cases, the trigger wasn't smoking or poor genetics. It was something they consumed the night before. A single glass, a familiar sip, a quiet indulgence that felt harmless. But alcohol, even in light amounts, can thicken your blood, interfere with the brain's protective vessels, and quietly tip the balance toward clot formation. Especially after 60, when your vascular system is more fragile and recovery is slower, the danger becomes real. Red wine, whiskey, cocktails, even herbal liqueur. Each one carries risk when your body no longer processes alcohol the way it used to. In this video, I'm going to walk you through 8 common alcoholic drinks that may quietly be raising your stroke risk, ones you may still be enjoying without a second thought. Before we dive in, if you haven't subscribed yet, I recommend you hit that button and turn on the bell so you never miss another health tip made just for you. If you enjoy this video, type 1 in the comments. If not, type 0 to let me know how I can make better content for you. 1. Red wine. When heart healthy turns brain dangerous, red wine has long carried a reputation as a friend to the heart. For decades, many seniors have been told that a small glass in the evening could be beneficial. It's become part of a familiar routine, something calming, something that feels like a small act of self-care. After all, it's not overindulgence, just one glass with dinner. But what many older adults don't realize is how alcohol, especially red wine, affects the aging brain in ways that are easy to miss until it's too late. The very drink often recommended for its cardiovascular benefits may, in fact, to be increasing your risk of a silent, overnight stroke. As we grow older, the body processes alcohol differently. The liver slows down. The kidneys lose efficiency. So that evening glass of wine stays in the bloodstream longer, affecting you into the early morning hours. Red wine contains both resveratrol, often praised for antioxidant support, and ethanol, a central nervous system depressant that changes blood vessel behavior. After consumption, vessels initially relax, but hours later, during sleep, those same vessels constrict. In older adults, whose arteries may already be less elastic, that shift can sharply raise blood pressure and limit oxygen delivery to the brain. And that's where serious problems begin. One case that stands out is Mr. James Holloway, 75 years old, a retired dentist from Ohio. He lived a steady, healthy lifestyle, no smoking, daily walks, no medications other than a multivitamin. He enjoyed a glass of red wine with dinner nearly every evening, something he picked up after reading about the Mediterranean diet. One morning, James woke up feeling slightly disoriented. He said the room seemed off, and his left arm didn't respond the way he expected. His wife noticed a subtle slur in his voice and insisted on calling for help. At the hospital, Scans confirmed a minor ischemic stroke. His labs didn't reveal major red flags, but dehydration was noted, and his blood pressure had spiked during the night. The doctors traced the pattern back to his nightly wine habit. What happened is more common than many realize. Alcohol leads to dehydration, especially overnight, that combined with blood vessel constriction makes the blood more viscous, just thick enough to form tiny clots in younger people. This might not pose much of a problem. But in an older brain, even a small clot lodged in a narrow artery can trigger a stroke. No loud symptoms, no pain, just a quiet moment during sleep when something changes and a life is altered. It's especially troubling because the ritual feels harmless, and it's deeply rooted in the belief that it's protective, but passwasant. The balance shifts. The body no longer processes alcohol the same way. What used to feel like relaxation may now be quietly increasing your stroke risk. This doesn't mean every senior who drinks wine will have a stroke, but it does mean that the older we get, the more carefully we must reassess our routines, especially those that affect brain circulation while we sleep. And red wine isn't the only drink that carries hidden risks. Many seniors turn to lighter options, believing they're safer, but one in particular, often served cold, bubbly, and refreshing, can quietly dehydrate your brain and alter your blood composition just as easily. Let's turn to beer, and why it may be doing more harm than it appears. 2. Beer. Lighter doesn't mean safer. It's one of the most familiar rituals in American life. The soft crack of a beer can opening at the end of the day. For many older adults, it doesn't feel like much. A cold one after mowing the lawn, during the evening news, or while playing cards with friends. It doesn't carry the same weight as whiskey or bourbon. Beer feels lighter, easier, like it couldn't possibly do harm, but in the body of someone over 60, it doesn't take much to tip the balance toward real danger. As a neurologist, I've seen too many cases where beer, yes, even just one or two contributed to a stroke that happened during the night. The truth is, beer doesn't hit you all at once. It's not about intoxication. It's about what happens after the slow dehydration, the subtle shifts in blood chemistry, and the way your body, especially past 60, struggles to adapt. Beer acts as a diuretic. It pulls fluid from your system, not just water, but also the electrolytes. Your heart and brain depend on sodium, potassium, and magnesium. And this matters because older adults often go through the day underhydrated without realizing it. Our sense of thirst fades with age. So when you add beer to that already low hydration state, the result is a gradual, overnight loss of fluid balance. Your blood thickens just enough, and your brain, now more vulnerable, is left exposed. That's exactly what happened to Mr. Leonard Davis, a 68-year-old retired bus driver from Illinois. Steady, responsible, friendly, not a heavy drinker by any means. But every night, he'd sit in his recliner with a couple of beers. Said it helped him fall asleep. He wasn't on any major medications. Blood sugar under control. Still walked his dog every morning. But one Monday, Leonard didn't come downstairs. His wife found him sitting up in bed, eyes open, but silent. His right leg wouldn't move. Paramedics brought him in, and scans confirmed a moderate ischemic stroke affecting the motor region of the brain. No clear signs of cholesterol buildup or irregular heartbeat, but what did stand out were mild signs of dehydration and narrowed vessels likely worsened by years of beer-related fluid loss. Leonard's labs showed no red flags that would have predicted this. He didn't feel drunk. He didn't feel sick. But he did feel something he couldn't quite explain the night before, just a little more tired than usual. That was the window. While he slept, the combination of mild dehydration, vascular stiffness, and overnight electrolyte loss led to a clot forming in a narrowed artery. And when it hit, it did so quietly and without warning. The danger with beer isn't its strength. It's how easily it slips into routine. It feels safe, familiar. It brings back memories of simpler times, but after trids, the body's filters slow, blood vessels stiffen, and hydration matters more than ever. Beer, despite its image, quietly disrupts that delicate system. It lowers your reserves when your brain needs protection the most. And it's not the only drink playing this dangerous game. Some beverages look even safer: sweet, colorful, served with umbrellas or in frosted glasses. They seem cheerful, festive, but for aging brains, these cocktails are far more toxic than they appear. Let's take a closer look at the next one. 3. Sweet cocktails. The silent saboteurs of the aging brain. They're colorful, they're sweet, and they go down easy. Those festive cocktails that seem harmless at first glance. A little umbrella, a sugared rim, maybe a cherry on top. For many older adults, sweet drinks feel like the safer option, softer than whiskey, lighter than a glass of wine, and a fun way to join the celebration without going overboard. But what most don't realize is that these cheerful drinks often carry the most silent and lasting damage, especially after age 60. The sugar, the alcohol, the timing, all of it quietly combines into a threat that builds slowly. Until one day, your brain simply can't handle it anymore. Sweet cocktails are often made with syrups, juices, flavored liqueurs, or soda, each one loaded with sugar, sometimes more than 30 grams per glass. Combine that with alcohol, and the body, particularly an older body, struggles. After 60, insulin resistance increases. Sugar stays in the bloodstream longer, doing more damage to blood vessels. And alcohol, already a dehydrator, strips the body of fluid just when the brain needs it most. The result is inflammation in the arteries, thickened blood, and fluctuating pressure during the night. These changes don't always show up right away, but inside the brain, they are setting the stage for a blockage. One woman I cared for, Mrs. Ruth Delgado Tisher-Sand from Arizona, experienced this firsthand. Ruth had always taken good care of herself. She stayed active, managed her weight, and took her blood pressure medication every morning without fail. On her grandson's graduation night, she enjoyed 2 large strawberry daiquiris, her favorite. No one thought twice about it. She seemed fine, laughing with family. But early the next morning, Ruth's daughter found her confused and slurring her words. Her right side was weak. She couldn't write her name. At the hospital, Scans showed a stroke had occurred during the night. Blood sugar was high. Pressure unstable. The likely trigger was that evening sweet cocktail alcohol paired with sugar, compounding the effects of age and medication. That's the quiet danger. These drinks mask the alcohol. You don't feel intoxicated. The sugar dulls the burn, encourages more sipping, and leaves you unaware of how much you're actually taking in. But for older adults, especially those on medication or with prediabetes, the risk is real. The brain is more fragile, blood vessels are less flexible, and the body no longer clears toxins quickly. What used to be a lighthearted drink turns into a hidden risk that can strike while you sleep. Without any warning, Ruth told me later, during rehab, I just wanted to feel like I was part of the party. I didn't think it would hurt me. And that's the tragedy. It's not about indulgence. It's about not knowing how different things become with age. Toast, festive drinks, once a harmless pleasure, now act like a slow-acting fuse beneath the surface. And if your body has already whispered signs, dizziness, fog, mornings, or sluggishness, it may already be trying to tell you the truth. But cocktails aren't the only drinks causing trouble. Some look clean, simple, even medicinal, clear, unflavored, taken in small sips at home, yet when alcohol like that enters an aging brain, the damage can be swift and sharp. Let's talk about whiskey and why it may be far more dangerous than it appears. 4. Whiskey, warming the soul while cooling the brain. There's a certain comfort in a glass of whiskey. For many older Americans, it represents familiarity, a quiet moment at the end of a long day. It's not about drinking to excess, it's about routine. Sitting in a favorite chair, maybe with the radio playing soft music, holding a glass that warms the chest and soothes the nerves. Whiskey feels dignified. It says, I've earned this peace. But for those over 60, that peaceful sip may be quietly setting the stage for something far more dangerous. Not to the liver, not even the heart, but to the brain. Whiskey is strong. Just a single per carries nearly 40% alcohol. But the danger for older adults isn't just in the concentration. It's in what happens silently after the last sip. When alcohol enters the system, it initially relaxes blood vessels, creating that familiar flush and gentle warmth. But as the liver begins its work slower now than in younger years, the relaxation wears off, blood vessels constrict, pressure can spike, and in a body where arteries have stiffened with time, where circulation isn't quite what it used to be. That shift can be enough to trigger a chain reaction deep within the brain. One man I treated recently, Mr. Harold Whitmore, 76 years old, a retired pharmacist from Kentucky, had a habit many would consider modest, no history of excess, no late-night parties, no cocktails, just one small glass of whiskey after dinner each night. He called it his evening pause. He said it helped him unwind, helped him sleep. And for years, it did, until the morning he didn't wake up the same. His wife found him on the porch, slouched in his chair, confused and slurring his words, his left hand limp in his lap. At the hospital, tests confirmed an ischemic stroke had struck during the early morning hours. His scans showed a blockage in one of the smaller vessels leading into the right hemisphere of his brain. His cholesterol levels were within range. No, atrial fibrillation. But what stood out was chronic low hydration and consistent evening alcohol. That whiskey, taken night after night, slowly altered his blood chemistry. Alcohol draws fluid from the body. And as we age, our ability to stay hydrated diminishes. For Harold, the combination of a stiffening vascular system and nightly dehydration created the perfect conditions for a clot to form and lodge without warning. He made it through, but the stroke changed his rhythm. His speech came back, but more slowly. His handwriting changed. His balance needed work. He later told me, "I thought I was doing something small. It never occurred to me that one drink could do that." And that's the part that hurts the idea, that what brings comfort can also bring risk, not because of excess, but because no one ever said, your brain doesn't bounce back like it used to. Whiskey doesn't shout its dangers. It doesn't leave you stumbling, but after treads, your brain, your liver, your blood vessels, they all move slower, repair slower, and carry more burden. One glass may not feel like much, but when it's nightly, and especially near bedtime, it can quietly tip the scale from calm to catastrophe. And whiskey isn't the only one. Clear liquors like vodka and gin are often seen as safer, purer, even medicinal in small doses. But when mixed with late nights and an aging brain, their effects can be just as dangerous. Let's take a closer look at vodka and why its silence may be even more deceptive. 5. Vodka and gin. Clear doesn't mean clean. They're clear, smooth, and often chosen because they seem cleaner. Vodka and gin carry a kind of quiet elegance. No sugar, no color, fewer calories. For many older adults, these spirits feel like the smart choice, a gentle drink to unwind without the heaviness of beer or the sweetness of cocktails. Mixed with tonic or sparkling water, they slide easily into the evening routine. But what feels light on the tongue can weigh heavily on the brain, especially past the age of 60. And it's not the taste that causes harm. It's what happens in your body silently while you sleep. Clear liquors are just as strong as darker ones. In fact, ounce for ounce, vodka and gin often contain 40% alcohol or more. That alcohol still dehydrates your tissues, still affects blood pressure, and still slows the nervous system. But because there's no sugar crash, no burning sensation, no sluggishness, these drinks don't feel dangerous. That's exactly why they are. After 60, your organs don't filter alcohol the way they used to. Your liver breaks it down more slowly. Your kidneys move less water through the body. And your arteries, already narrower from aging, lose the ability to respond quickly to pressure shifts. So, while you think you're having a mild nightcap, your brain is actually moving into a more vulnerable state. I remember treating Mr. Thomas Barrett Tishasu, a retired railroad inspector from Nevada. Thomas had a quiet way about him, never smoked, ate well, still went fishing with his brothers twice a month. Per man. He told me he didn't think of himself as a drinker, just one vodka and club soda each evening. But one morning, his daughter noticed something wasn't right. He was slower to speak, seemed confused about the date, and had trouble buttoning his shirt. At the hospital, imaging revealed a tiny clot had blocked a blood vessel near the visual spatial area of his brain. It hadn't affected his speech or limbs, but it had caused subtle memory and coordination issues. He didn't have high cholesterol. His heart rhythm was normal, but when we looked closer, we saw the signs. Moderate dehydration, borderline blood pressure variation, and a routine of nightly alcohol that slowly drained his system without making a sound. The combination of aging vessels, decreased fluid intake, and that single evening drink created the perfect setup for a clot to form and travel. He didn't feel it. He didn't notice it. But it changed how his brain functioned the next morning, and beyond, Thomas said what so many others have said before. I thought I was being careful. It never even crossed my mind that clear liquor could be dangerous. That's the problem. It looks safe. It tastes light. But inside, it sets off a chain reaction that an older body may not be strong enough to handle. And those low-calorie mixers, many contain sodium, preservatives, or artificial sweeteners that pull further on the body's balance, especially the brain's need for stable hydration and minerals. It's not about fear. It's about understanding. If you've relied on vodka or gin as part of your evening routine, it may be time to reassess. Your brain deserves rest, not risk. And while clear liquors may seem subtle, the next drink on our list carries its own kind of deception. Sweet, homemade, often shared with pride. Let's talk about fruit wines and why tradition isn't always safe for an aging brain. 6. Homemade fruit wines. When tradition turns toxic, there's something comforting, even sacred, about the tradition of making things by hand. It's part of the American spirit, growing your own food, preserving the harvest, passing down recipes through generations. And for many older adults, homemade fruit wine is part of that legacy. Whether it's blackberry, peach, plum, or elderberry, that deep-colored bottle stored in a dark cabinet often feels like a memory wrapped in glass. It brings back images of autumn evenings, family dinners, and the quiet pride of self-sufficiency. But for the aging brain, that beloved bottle may be carrying more than just nostalgia. It could be carrying danger. Unlike commercial wines, homemade fruit wines don't follow strict guidelines. There's no standard alcohol content, no quality control over the fermentation process, no safety checks for the chemical byproducts that can form. What you end up with might be stronger than you expect, sometimes significantly stronger, and even if it tastes smooth and familiar, it may contain compounds like acetaldehyde or methanol, both of which can quietly harm the nervous system, especially when paired with age-related changes in liver function and blood flow. That's what happened with Mrs. Geraldine Parker Bosser R. from Central Virginia, a retired nurse, sharp as a tack, and known in her church community for her homemade apple wine. She made it every September and gave it to friends for the holidays. Just one glass in the evening, she said, helped her unwind and sleep. But one morning, her neighbor found her on the porch, confused and struggling to keep her balance. Her coffee had spilled in her lap, and she couldn't explain how she got there. At the hospital, her scans revealed a mild ischemic stroke No history of smoking. No diabetes. No cholesterol issues. But when her daughter mentioned the wine, we took a closer look. The sample her family brought in tested at nearly 19% alcohol, much higher than most store-bought wines. Worse, there were signs the fermentation hadn't completed fully, leaving behind residual sugar and neurotoxic byproducts. For a younger person, the body might have handled it. But in Geraldine's case, it led to mild dehydration, a temporary spike in blood pressure, and ultimately a clot that formed and traveled to the cerebellum. It affected her coordination, her memory, and her independence, all from a glass she believed was helping her rest. She told me later, during physical therapy, "It came from my backyard. I never imagined it could hurt me, and that's exactly why it's so dangerous. Homemade wine doesn't taste like a threat. It feels familiar, comforting, but after treads, the brain's defenses weaken, blood vessels narrow, toxins sling along, the body's ability to flush out harmful compounds slows. What once felt like tradition can quietly become a health risk, one that sneaks in with each sip taken before bed." Geraldine now keeps her bottles still lined up on the shelf, but they're filled with dried lavender and clippings from her herb garden. "The memories still matter," she said, "but my brain matters more. It's not about letting go of the past. It's about adapting tradition to match the body we live in now. And if fruit wine made with love can still pose such a risk, consider what happens with drinks designed to sparkle, to dazzle, to toast milestones, light, featsy, and celebratory. The next drink on our list can wreak havoc on your blood vessels in ways few expect. Let's turn now to champagne and why it's not always a celebration for your brain. 7. Champagne. When bubbles burst brain balance, it's the sound of joy, the pop of the cork, the fizz of bubbles rising in a delicate glass. Champagne has long marked life's special moments. Birthdays, weddings, holidays, retirements. It feels elegant, gentle, almost harmless. For many older adults, it's the drink they choose when they want to celebrate in moderation, but what feels light and refined on the outside may be doing something far less graceful inside the aging brain. Champagne, like other sparkling wines, is absorbed more quickly into the bloodstream than still beverages. The carbonation in the drink speeds up alcohol absorption through the stomach lining, which means the effects of even a small glass can hit faster and harder than expected. In a younger body, this might not matter, but after treads, when the brain's protective systems have already begun to slow, that fast rise in alcohol levels can trigger a dangerous chain reaction. Blood vessels dilate, then constrict. Blood pressure rises and falls unpredictably, and in arteries that are already stiff or narrow, that pressure swing can create the perfect opportunity for a clot to form or travel. That's exactly what happened to Mrs. Margaret Hollis Bosher, a retired librarian from Maine. Her family described her as sharp, independent, and active in her community. One evening at her nephew's wedding, she toasted with champagne, had a few joyful sips, and danced with her grandson. Everything seemed fine until the next morning, when she woke up confused, lightheaded, and unable to remember where she was. Her daughter rushed her to the hospital. Imaging revealed a transient ischemic attack a mini stroke caused by a temporary blockage in one of the brain's smaller arteries. It didn't leave her paralyzed, but it affected her balance and memory for weeks. What surprised her family was that Margaret never drank heavily. She hadn't even finished 2 glasses, but that was enough. Between the bubbles, the late hour, and her mild dehydration from dancing and socializing, the alcohol had reached her system quickly. Paired with age-related vascular stiffness and a small blood pressure medication, it pushed her brain to the edge. Margaret told me later, "It didn't feel like I was doing anything risky. I was just happy." And that's the danger. Champagne doesn't feel dangerous. But for the aging brain, it can be, especially when it's consumed standing up. In warm rooms, with little water and a lot of excitement. And while champagne sparkles on the surface, the next drinks on our list carry a different kind of risk. Rich, deep, and hidden in quiet sips. Brandy and cognac may look refined, but inside an aging brain, they can carry more weight than most seniors realize. Let's talk about why these spirits deserve closer attention. 8. Brandy and Cognac. The slow burn that silently strains the brain. There's a quiet elegance to brandy and cognac. The kind of drink poured slowly after dinner, held in the palm of the hand while soft music plays or a good book waits nearby. For many older adults, it's a symbol of refinement, no rush, no noise, just one gentle sip to mark the end of the day. It feels calm, mature, and in control. But in reality, these drinks can be among the most deceptive, not because they overwhelm, but because they quietly take their toll, especially on the aging brain. Brandy and cognac are both high-proof spirits, often 35 to 60% alcohol by volume, distilled from wine, and rich with chemical byproducts of fermentation. These compounds, called congeners, are harder for the body to clear, especially in older adults. The drinks don't taste harsh, which gives a false sense of safety, but under the surface, they place serious strain on systems already working harder with age. After 60, the liver processes alcohol more slowly. The kidneys retain less fluid, and blood vessels lose their flexibility. All of this makes the brain more vulnerable to shifts in blood flow, dehydration, and clot formation. That's what happened to Mr. Raymond Ellis. Tishitsi, a retired school superintendent from North Carolina, a thoughtful man, steady in his habits, and proud of his health. Every night, just before bed, he'd pour a short glass of brandy, the same ritual he had followed for over 20 years. It never felt excessive. He said it helped quiet his thoughts. But one spring morning, Raymond woke up confused. His left hand trembled, and he couldn't find the words to finish a sentence. His wife called an ambulance. Tests showed a mild ischemic stroke affecting part of his language center. No major red flags in his labs, just a subtle dehydration, a slight spike in blood pressure overnight, and blood that was just thick enough to allow a clot to form. That single glass of brandy, combined with age-related vascular stiffness and slow alcohol metabolism, had quietly created the conditions for a stroke. Raymond is recovering. He's walking again, speaking more fluently, but he gave up alcohol entirely. I never thought something that felt so small could do something so big. He said, Brandy and Cognac aren't dangerous because they act fast. They're dangerous because they build pressure gently, invisibly, and by the time your brain reacts, it may already be too late. But there's one more drink to discuss, one that's been promoted as therapeutic. It claims to help the heart, yet in seniors, it may silently push the brain toward its breaking point. Final wake-up call. Before you lift that next glass, pause just for a moment and ask yourself, is this still the right choice for me? Right now, in this chapter of life, you've lived through decades of joy, loss, lessons, and love. You've earned wisdom, and with that wisdom comes the power to protect what matters most, your clarity, your voice, your memories, and your independence. I've sat beside too many families, holding their hands after a stroke stole words, movement, and light from someone they loved. And so often, it started with something as small as a nightly drink. Not recklessness, just a habit. No one questioned, but after treads, even small things echo louder in the body. Your brain isn't what it was, and that's not failure. That's simply time asking us to adapt. You don't have to give everything up, but you do have the right to make informed, powerful choices. Choices that guard your future, that let you dance with your grandchild, that let you laugh without forgetting the punchline, that let you say, I'm still here, with full presence and grace. So if this video stirred something in you, don't let it fade. Share it with someone you care about. Comment below with one thing you're choosing to change, or one question still on your mind. Like this video if it made you feel seen, and most of all, subscribe, because this channel is here for you. Every week, we'll be bringing you real, compassionate, science-backed advice that speaks to your season of life. Your next 10 years can be stronger, brighter, clearer than you imagined. But it starts today with awareness, with courage, and with the decision to protect the most important part of you, your mind